Star Trek just made Khan's TOS canon next to impossible. For decades, Star Trek fans have lived with one of the franchise's strangest paradoxes, the history of Khan Noonien Singh. First introduced in the original series episode Space Seed, and later immortalized in The Wrath of Khan, the genetically enhanced tyrant is one of Trek's most enduring villains. But as the timeline has evolved, especially through the modern Star Trek shows, Khan's story has become increasingly difficult to reconcile with the rest of canon. Now, after recent developments across Strange New Worlds and Discovery, it's becoming almost impossible to make Khan's 20th century origins fit within Star Trek's ever-shifting timeline. And ironically, it's Star Trek itself that made this happen. The trouble with the Eugenics Wars. In TOS, Khan's backstory was relatively simple, at least by 1960 standards. He was one of several supermen created through genetic engineering during the late 20th century. The so-called Eugenics Wars erupted in the 1990s, when Khan and his fellow augments tried to conquer much of Earth. After being defeated, Khan and over 80 of his followers fled the planet in a sleeper ship, the SS Botany Bay, where they drifted in space until the Enterprise stumbled upon them centuries later. When Space Seed first aired in 1967, this version of history was charmingly futuristic. The 1990s were still far away, and Star Trek could imagine a world where global wars and superhumans were plausible. But as real-time marched on, Trek's timeline ran headfirst into reality, and reality, of course, didn't feature any genetically engineered tyrants ruling a third of Earth. This was one of those things fans were happy to overlook for decades. After all, Star Trek often treated its timeline loosely. But now, with Strange New Worlds exploring Khan's legacy through characters like Lon Noonien Singh, Discovery playing with time travel, and Picard directly addressing 21st century genetics research, the problem can't be ignored anymore. Strange New Worlds moves the Eugenics Wars. Again, the most direct blow to TOS canon came in Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 3, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. In it, Lon Noonien Singh is thrown back in time to 21st century Toronto. She ends up in 2022, a world that looks very much like our own. But the episode drops a revelation that changes everything. Khan is alive in this era, still a child, hidden away in a secret facility known as the Institute for Human Advancement. This creates a temporal paradox the size of a warp core explosion. If Khan is a child in 2022, how could he have led a global war in the 1990s as TOS established? It's not just a nitpick. The episode goes out of its way to acknowledge the inconsistency, and then leans into it. Lon's companion, a time traveler named Sira, points out that time has been rewritten multiple times, and the true Eugenics Wars were either delayed or altered by interference. The implication is clear. Strange New Worlds is no longer treating the Eugenics Wars as fixed history. The timeline has shifted, perhaps even rewritten itself, making TOS's version of events effectively obsolete. For the first time, Star Trek openly admits that its own canon can no longer line up with what we know about our real-world 1990s, or even the internal Trek timeline that once depended on it. The Temporal Cold War fallout. This isn't the first time Star Trek has meddled with its own past. The Enterprise series in the early 2000s introduced the concept of the Temporal Cold War, where factions from different centuries tried to manipulate history to their advantage. At the time, this story arc seemed like a quirky time travel twist, but in hindsight, it provides a convenient if messy explanation for why Strange New Worlds can rewrite 20th century events so freely. If time travel manipulation became commonplace in the Star Trek universe, and Enterprise, Discovery, and Strange New Worlds all confirm it has, then the 1990s Khan Wars might simply have been erased or delayed as part of a temporal correction. Perhaps the Eugenics Wars were pushed forward to the 21st century, blending into the chaos of the World War III timeline that First Contact and Discovery referenced. This idea, while clever, effectively breaks TOS canon. The Enterprise crew in Space Seed believed the Eugenics Wars were history, not myth. If the wars were shifted out of the 1990s, then either the Enterprise crew's history books were wrong, which feels odd for Starfleet officers, or the very fabric of time has changed beneath their feet. Either way, Trek's current canon can't coexist with its original one anymore. Khan's legacy can't be contained by one timeline. Beyond the timeline mess, Strange New Worlds also reframes Khan's legacy in a way that fundamentally alters his meaning in TOS. In Space Seed, Khan was a relic of a bygone era, the embodiment of humanity's dangerous flirtation with genetic perfection. But in SNW, Khan's existence is part of an ongoing pattern of history repeating itself. La'an's trauma over her family name becomes symbolic of how the Federation's ideals are always haunted by what humanity used to be. By showing young Khan alive in 2022, SNW suggests that the line between our world and Star Trek's world isn't as distant as it once was. The Federation's utopia isn't built on a fixed past. It's built on an unstable timeline that can rewrite itself to accommodate new lessons about humanity. In that sense, Star Trek is no longer just bending canon. It's redefining it as something fluid, shaped by moral evolution rather than historical accuracy. Picard and the problem of genetic destiny. To make things even more complicated, Star Trek Picard Season 3 reintroduces genetic manipulation as a key part of the 25th century story. Data's return, Soon's experiments, and the changeling infiltration all revolve around the same theme that birthed Khan: humanity's temptation to improve itself through artificial means. But Picard also blurs the line between genetic evolution and synthetic life. The Federation bans genetic engineering after the Augments' rise, yet embraces synthetic beings like Soji and New Data. In doing so, Picard essentially admits that humanity's fear of augmentation was misplaced. The very thing Khan represented might have been humanity's natural next step all along. When you put that side by side with Strange New Worlds' timeline shift, Khan's story feels more like a myth that Star Trek keeps retelling, each time reshaped by the moral anxieties of its current century. He's not just a man from the 1990s anymore. He's an echo, a concept, an archetype of what humanity could become if it loses its ethical compass. That's fascinating storytelling, but it means the Khan of TOS can't logically exist in the same universe anymore. The wrath of retcon. Let's be honest, part of what makes Star Trek special is its willingness to evolve with its audience. When The Wrath of Khan came out in 1982, it didn't bother explaining how Khan's 1990s origin fit with the real world. It didn't need to. The emotional weight of the story transcended continuity. But modern Star Trek is different. It's serialized, continuity-driven, and often reflexive about its own history. Every retcon now comes with a lore explanation, a wink to the audience that says, yes, we know this doesn't make sense, but maybe that's the point. So when Strange New Worlds puts Khan in 2022, it isn't just breaking canon, it's commenting on it. It's saying that Star Trek can't pretend its 1960s version of the future still maps onto our reality. The franchise has outgrown the very timeline that birthed it. This creative flexibility keeps Trek alive, but it also makes it impossible to reconcile with the canon purism of TOS. The more Star Trek evolves, the less possible it becomes for Khan's original story to exist unaltered.